Wonderful. We are delighted to now be working on the third in our whole series of courses or lectures or sessions or conversations or whatever we want to call them. This is the first in a series called Women in Social Policy, which in some ways could be the most boring course in the universe, but is actually one of the most empowering, powerful, sassy, fierce, intense, robust, and potentially useful courses in the universe. So, what I want to tell you is, first, when I've done this course over a 12-week period, rather than in cyber and catch as you catch can, what I've always done is I've shown 2 or 3 or 4 videos right up front, because I would wish in a course on women in social policy that we learn about the women who went before us and who fought for all the incredible opportunities and resources which we pretty much take for granted now. So, for example, somebody had to fight along the way for women to have the right to drive, for women to have the right to have their own bank account, for women to have the right to divorce, to have reproductive control, for women to have the right to full-time employment and get paid the same as men. So the town that I lived in at one time, women weren't allowed to go work in the mines. It was simply against the law to have women go work in the mine, and the philosophy at the time had been that women shouldn't be put in such dangerous work or high-risk work, or it was inappropriate for women to be alone with a bunch of men, that kind of men in the mine. So there was a whole bunch of baggage and philosophy around women in the mines, right? And
there's a whole lot of philosophy and language around it, like what a woman is supposed to be and what a woman is supposed to do, because women can be in potentially dangerous situations if it serves them.
Right, if it serves the state, if it serves the powers that be, sure. But then if it serves us, maybe not. Right? Maybe not. So, women in social policy is actually, in some ways, if it was up to me, this would be like 9 courses. But of course, it's only one course for only 10 or 12 weeks, and I can only offer up little snippets and samples, or a kind of a buffet, and you do self-serve. But in a lot of ways, Women in Social Policy deserved for us to do a whole history and her story of how certain things have come to be and how other things have been stuck or more difficult to achieve. So I wanted to do that little preamble. I also want to say that when I do this course live, one of the things I do is show documentaries on various women who've done courageous things, tenacious things, who've suffragettes, sort of shero videos. And I would invite you to go and find 1 or 2 sheroes yourselves that are the fighters on the causes you care about. So for the purposes of this course, I'm probably going to have you do 3 assignments, and you will do 3 summaries of 3 social issues. You'll talk about the issue, talk about the legislation or documentation that goes with that issue, and then you will share in your assignment what your dream resolutions of that would be. Now, why I put that into the world is the idea of dreaming is also incredibly potent for the work that we're going to do. In terms of women in social policy, 200 years ago, it would not have been imaginable for me to be in a house that I own myself, William Bank, and for my 2 female colleagues here to be in 3rd year, 4th year university, in things like information technology and in psychology.
Who don't have a dowry.
Who don't have a dowry, right? That we would have been already by the ages you 2 are, you would have been married off probably by your family.
Married off, had kids.
You might by now, in your early 20s already, have 2, 3, 4 kids because there was no birth control. So think about all these privileges and opportunities and resources, and remember and owe gratitude to all the women who fought in a million ways for hundreds of years for all those other resources. Unemployment insurance, maternity leave, minimum wage, sick leave. All of these things didn't just appear in the universe. They had to be fought for. First they had to be dreamt, imagined, fought for. Some of them were, or most of them were very incremental. We achieve a little bit and then a little bit more and a little bit more. And then there's other things that suddenly just all kinds of synchronicities in the universe come into play, and boom, we got it. For example, in my own lifetime, I'm 60, and in my own lifetime, there was, when I was in my early 20s, let's say, it was incomprehensible for two women to legally marry and adopt children. And now it's kind of, this is my wife, and this is happening, and here's our child. And that's very, very recent, I think, only in the last decade, really, that the legal and administrative and life insurance, health insurance, all those kind of services and programs that make our lives so much better, all of us have been there. So two women or two men can fall in love and then legally have a ceremony, a marriage, and put each other on each other's health insurance plan, life insurance plan. Those are incredible, life-changing opportunities and resources that could not have even been dreamt of 200 years ago, or 100 years ago, or even 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Right? So, how super wonderful is that? So every day as you go through your life, I invite you this semester to reflect on these opportunities and resources that are kind of, for younger women right now, taken for granted. And they should be taken for granted. It is your birthright to have all these opportunities and resources. But we know there has been, let's say, half the population that didn't want us to have that intrinsic birthright. Then we also have to reflect on things, even something simple in a way like voting. Indigenous women only had the right to vote, I think, in the 1960s in Canada. And there's still some situations that are unfulfilled, some opportunities unfulfilled for women who are Indigenous and who live on reserves. And there's a lot of situations that still, perhaps on paper, look like inequality exists, but hasn't yet fully materialized. And sometimes that paper trail is what makes the difference. So I made some kind of notes that I wanted to speak about in terms of the whole overview of women in social policy. And then we might even make a second video where I go through all these books. But this is our intro. Welcome. Thank you for signing up for this master's level course, Women in Social Policy in Social Work, but very relevant to many, many professions. So, some quick things. One idea. In this course, or in this conversation, I think it's important to realize that sometimes even one word, changing one word in a document, if it's a municipal document, provincial, federal, or a legal document, or in an organization's document, the mission statement, let's say, all of this is part of social policy, right? That policy is kind of, let's say, the day-to-day shuffle and hustle of how things happen, your job description, right? If you get hired for a job and they give you a document that says, you've been hired to do all things for all people at all times and other duties as assigned, you're in trouble. What we're looking for is for things to be specific. The more specific, the better. And using our words. I just saw a beautiful bird land over there. Oh my God, it had orange. It was a flicker. What a delight. Northern, yay. So, sometimes, we'll go further into this, but changing one word in a document can make a difference for a whole group of people. We'll just leave it at that for this moment. The other thing is, what we want to be looking at is whatever the documents that are being produced, the policies, the laws, the protocols, job description, organizational mission, here's a line I want you to remember. Nothing about us without us. And that comes up a lot in social work. So if you're designing policy for, let's say, all the employees at UNBC, you want to have someone from the cleaning staff. You want to have someone from the bookstore. You want to have sorry, look, can you see it? The flicker? Isn't it exquisite? Can you see it? It's on the post. There it is. Sorry, we just had an uninvited, unimagined, but super fabulous interruption of a flicker shining its beauty. What can we do? We had to share that with you, students in the class somewhere. So, if you're trying to design any kind of document or paper trail, all the people who might be impacted should be in the room helping you design it. That would be the ideal. This is part of why for 5,000 years, if you only have white, heterosexual, able-bodied, wealthy men in the room making policies, laws, and decisions,
about things like women's reproductive rights.
Right. Or people with mental health issues, or people who are poor,
or indigenous people.
Or indigenous people, or black people, or new immigrants. You need to have representation from all the potential locations of how a policy or law might impact. Everybody who might be shaped or influenced by that needs to be in the room as you're designing it. We all have blind spots, and sometimes you don't know your blind spots. That's how they are. So nothing about us without us. Who are the stakeholders in this story? How do they get to be in the room? Sometimes you have to do a lot of advocacy and outreach and creative providing of childcare, or providing of transportation, or having meetings in the evening to make sure all those people can be part of the process. So, the other thing. When you're thinking of women in social policy, what you want to do, first look at the history and history of an issue to see where you've been able to have successes in the past. Like, if you only look at something right now, you might not have the fullest, richest comprehension of that issue. Mm-hmm. And I'll give you an example. You hear a lot all the time in the news about, childcare is too expensive, providing government-funded daycare and childcare and flexible care and quality care, that's just too expensive and it can't be done, really. We'd like to, but it can't be done. Well, let's look at the history and her story of this. During the Second World War, when all the men were away fighting and the women needed to be used in the factories to produce things, guess who was able to provide tons and tons and tons of quality childcare? Oh yeah, the provincial government, the federal government, everybody was. Let's create lots of opportunities for paid or free childcare. Because if they wanted the women to go work in the mine or in the factories or wherever, they needed the children to be taken care of. And hey, almost overnight, they created childcare everywhere. Quality, free, flex time. In fact, the ratio of childcare available during the Second World War has almost never in Canadian history been equal to that. My point being, when they say, it can't be done, it can't be done, sometimes you look backwards and you go, how come we could do it over there, right? So the other thing you want to look at sometimes with these issues as you're pondering, where else in the world has it been done? Because sometimes you can just think, in Canada, blah, blah, blah. But what if in Sweden or Norway or Germany or some other country that isn't dramatically different from us in any discernible ways? Maybe the last 20 years they've been providing childcare. Let's do that. So the other thing you can look at is, where have things been provided that are close to what we're dreaming of? So for example, right now, we in effect have national free childcare. It's called public education. From kindergarten to grade 12, in effect, all kinds of people send all their children out every day, 9 to 4, for childcare, right? So if you think, why don't we just bring it down? If we can do it from kindergarten to grade 12, why can't we do it from age 1? All we have to do is stretch out or expand what already exists, right? If you take the example of adult education, there's been different moments where people say, we can't just have all kinds of people all kinds of adults going to school and getting free grade 12, free grade 10 adult upgrading. In this town, in this province, the previous provincial government cut funding for adult upgrading and said, oh, well, people who want to go and get their grade 9, 10, 11, 12 in math, English, science, they'll pay for the tuition at the college. And then when the NDP came in, they overturned that and turned it back to free, right? Mm-hmm. And so you could say, well, if we can provide free grade 9, 10, 11, 12 education for all the people in our province who are aged 13, 14, 17, right? Why can't we provide for people who are 47? It's actually no different. It already exists. We're just expanding the pool of who the potential recipients are of that program. We can do it. So I'm offering you, these are patterns of ways to think. These are some templates or questions to ask yourself in women in social policy, whatever the level is. If you were working on changing the policy in a particular work sector, and let's say you wanted to have equality between the males and the females, or between one group of workers and another workers, ask yourself, where else has that been achieved? Maybe among electricians it has been achieved, or maybe among mining workers it has been achieved, and you're working with electricians or something, right? So ask yourself, where in the history and her story of our country has this been achieved? Has this been achieved in another province? Has this been achieved in another country? Has this been achieved in another discipline or profession or group of people? And then rather than reinventing the wheel, you can pull in those tidbits of success that have been achieved somewhere else. And the next question you want to be asking yourself in Women in Social Policy is, which levels of government do I need to target? And sometimes if you have an issue, it may be mostly a municipal issue, or it might be mostly a provincial issue, or mostly a federal issue, or it might be a combo, or maybe you need to get all three on side. So again, asking yourself, has this issue, whatever it is, been successfully handled municipally in China or in Nuvatak, right? Which level of government? That's another thing. Because if you put all this energy into asking the correct questions in a robust and intelligent way, but you're asking the question to the wrong people, you're not going to get what you want, right? So then the other thing is, I would wish you to reflect on this. Sometimes you'll hear things out there, and I know I've discussed this in another video, you'll hear things out there, the provincial government is going to give you what you need. We're going to give $10,000 to this issue. And at first you go, oh boy, really? Well, it's going to be good. We did this, right? Then you read the fine print and it says, $10,000 over the next 10 years, starting 10 years from now. That's what they've just done. They've given you nothing. They've just tricked you. They've just dissuaded you. It doesn't start full 10 years from now. Well, we know that provincial governments come and go every 4 years. So the next government can just delete that or change it or not even start on it. So what we always want to be doing, when we hear numbers, when we hear an answer to our questions, you want to reflect on, when does this start? And how much? Because at first you think $10,000 sounds like a lot of money, or 10 million or whatever. But if it doesn't start for 10 years, and it's going to be, let's say, incrementally introduced. It'll start in 10 years, and then it'll be introduced over a 10-year period. They're basically giving you 3 nickels and a stick. It's not actually a substantive amount. But because we're not excellent at working with some of these issues, because you might be working in a women's shelter and you want to change something. You don't have a PhD in policy or accounting. Be suspicious. So ask, when does it start? How much will this actually mean when it plays out per person? If someone says, oh, we're going to put $10 million into childcare all across our nation, oh, that might work out to $5 per family. Not much, right? So be suspicious, and before you get too excited, remember that sometimes these games are a little bit like when you buy real estate. You're selling your house, and I'm buying a house. You say you want 100,000 for your house. I say I'll give you 90. You say I could consider 98. I say my highest offer is 95, and I want you to throw in all the furniture. You say I could do 96, and I'll throw in the furniture but not the fridge. Right? So notice everything that is around us, like unemployment insurance, mother's allowance, disability, Canada pension plan, disability, all those things. That is the kind of game that has often gone back and forth over decades. Over decades. When you think right now, if you go to the hospital and you go there, right now you leave here, you get hit by a car, and you get to go to the hospital for free. You just walk in for free. Thousands of people fought for that for maybe 50 years, and it's a miracle. If you reflect, if you watch shows like Al Jazeera or documentaries from other countries where they don't have free healthcare, one family can be completely destroyed for a whole generation by one breadwinner losing the use of their legs, right? But here in Canada, you would be able to get a wheelchair. It's not the best, and it would take a time, and you could also get a cast. You could get free surgery, all kinds of things. A few years ago, someone yelled, "Stop the bus," and I actually grabbed the bus. As it was true story, don't do that. And I ended up, I called 911 on the sidewalk. I had a concussion, all this stuff. Within minutes, I'd go to the hospital. That was on a Friday, and on Sunday, I had the surgery for my wrist. If that wasn't free and available, I would not be able to use this hand right now. I ended up with 17 stitches, and they put pieces of metal in my hand. In another country, in another time, I wouldn't have been able to type or do my work. This hand had surgery also. Mm-hmm. And then I also had surgery on my finger, which was broken. And
well, more than that, you got the surgery, and if it got infected, you could go in and it would be free for you to go and get antibiotics and get it done again.
Exactly. Those are miracles, and a lot of people in Canada don't always appreciate. They may, oh, I had to go, and this took me a month to get my appointment. We could improve it for sure, but these are things that if we don't hang on to them and fight for them and appreciate them and celebrate them, some of them will slide backwards. But also looking at our successes as social justice activists for women in social policy, and then saying, okay, we made that work, how can we expand on that, right? How can we expand on that? As a working class woman, if I had been unable to use my hands for the rest of my life, everything would have been different. It's just, I can't even go there. It would be a nightmare, right? But we do see in some countries still those things happen. A person is in a car accident and that's it. That's it. So, appreciate what you've got, celebrate where we've had successes, and then dream a different future. And that's why I use the real estate example. You want to dream big. You want to dream and ask for a lot, knowing that you might only get half of what you want. But then once you've got that half of what you want, you've got that open door and that portal that you can keep pushing it over the decades and years ahead. So, nothing about us without us. Who are the stakeholders? Which specific levels of government are you addressing? Which body within those governments? So, it's a federal issue. But is it this representative or this or this or this? Also, we have elections coming up provincially right now. Pick your time. Be prepared, right? Some of you have been watching the news. For example, Trump, who's the president in America right now, has been avoiding this, showing us his taxes for the last 3 years. And somehow, 30 days before the election, his taxes have been made public. So to me, his enemies were holding this. They knew. I don't think it's an accident that it's 30 days before people have been leaking it, and there's research and there's this and there's that. as a social justice activist, social policy, sometimes it's pick your time too. Get your resources in line, get your research, your signatures, your petition, your data, whatever it is, and then also pick your time. Don't waste your opportunity. The media will only pick up on issues for a short period. They have the attention span of a flea. So you want to pick your exact day, blitz the media, and then maybe save it for
a time when it's also relevant to other things.
Others, exactly. Sometimes through coalitions and solidarities. Exactly. So those are a lot of things. One other thing I wanted to just make note of is what you're always shooting for too is core structural changes. Sometimes the government will. An issue that is in the news today is personal care workers. So those are the people who work in nursing homes or work with elderly, work with the ill, they work with people with special needs. They have been traditionally in Canada almost all female. A disproportion of them have been people of color or new immigrant people. And those are the people who wipe bums and who wash faces and brush the teeth of people who are disabled and so on. They've been poorly paid. In this campaign right now about C-19, where thousands of people have died in those contexts, all of a sudden personal care workers are essential workers. They're the sheroes and the heroes keeping grandma and grandpa alive, right?
We need to celebrate them.
We need to celebrate them. Right now, right here in our nation, the federal government threw some money at some of these contexts of $2 more per hour or $3 more per hour per worker, but it's only till the pandemic is over. The provincial government in Ontario yesterday said they're going to raise the wages in all provincially funded organizations in Ontario for all personal care workers, $3 an hour, but only for the next 5 months. Well, we want to call them on that. We want to say, thank you, fabulous, you love grandma, you love grandpa, you don't want people dying, you don't want epidemics. You think this work is now worth $18 an hour. In 6 months, in 6 years, in 66 years, it's still worth $3 more than minimum wage. These people are A, risking their lives, being exposed to all kinds of illnesses. B, they're doing really hard physical labor. Any of you who've worked in that kind, you're lifting people, carrying people, you're washing, spraying, scrubbing, vacuuming. You're doing a lot of actual physical, muscular work.
And not to mention, you also have to have like a strong stomach to deal with that stuff.
Exactly.
Like you're not just dealing with like cleaning, like residential, because I've done that too. That's pretty gross, but I still don't have to deal with the amount of bodily fluids that...
Vomit, excrement, urine, stinky bodies, elderly bodies that we often would think of as not very appealing to be touching and so on. You're also strangely, surprisingly to people who don't know, you're dealing with a lot of violence. When you're working with Alzheimer's people, people with mental health issues, people who are who don't like being touched or cleaned, people who've already had 55 different personal care workers in their lifetime, they will hit you, they will yell at you, they will say things, they will run away from you, and you have to pull them back, and you know, it's time I have to wash your hair today. You're dealing with situations where you can get punched in the face. Some of these stories are high risk, actually. More as risky as a cop.
Yeah, if not more, because we don't have a gun.
Right, we have no necessary tools or restraints, right? So right now is a time where I would wish everybody who's working on these issues, and I'm certain they are out there saying, never mind just 3 weeks or 3 months, we want this permanent. This is permanent. And it also involves incredible skills. It's often thought of as unskilled labor. You have to really develop people skills, self-care, strategizing, timing, pacing. You've got to have trickery. If you're working, loving trickery. If you're working with people who have Alzheimer's, you have to know how to say things to them. They're crying and sobbing and so on. And you don't want to be, the woman says, my husband hasn't come home from work yet, but you know the husband's been dead for 5 years. You're not going to say, your husband's dead, turn over, I need to wash your bum, right? You say, oh, your husband will be here soon, and maybe the two of you will go for dinner, but first we have to get you all cleaned up and pretty, and then the woman will go, oh, okay, and right? It requires incredible tactical skills, let's say, interpersonal skills, finesse, elegance, all kinds of stuff. Turning people in a bed, if you don't know how to do this the right way, you could cause injury. You could cause them to fall off the bed. There's a lot of the sequencing. We've talked in other videos. I'm always talking about my ill husband before he died, but you needed to know this pill at this time and then this at this time, and then you've got 30 minutes where you could wash him up and do these things. And if you miss that, now it's time for his next meal with diabetes and so on. There has to be a sequencing of the pills, the food, the sleep, the so on. So again, there's a lot if you've got 10 patients, right? So what we want to do, if you were working on this issue right now, which is a women in social policy issue, because disproportionately these are women who do this work, you want the wages raised, you want the dignity of the person respected, their professionalism and the contributions to the well-being of our world. We know that, let's say, a taxi driver might make $20 an hour, or I don't know, let's say a hairdresser, not to minimize a hairdresser, but there's other professions that are seen as professions where $20 an hour is seen as a reasonable amount. Some of these people in the profession of personal care aid, they have been getting minimum wage. They're working shift work. Sometimes they work 12-hour shifts. It's unconscionable how they've been treated in the past. So this is a profound time. And if we could just keep pushing and get it, this is now the permanent minimum wage for this work of $22 an hour, plus benefits, plus job security, plus sick time, because you're taking a risk, you're exposed to all these illnesses. We want these workers, if they feel they've got a temperature and maybe they have C19, if they don't have paid sick leave, a lot of them will show up for work and they could end up killing 100 people, right? If they reinfect everybody in the nursing home. We don't want that. So that's a brilliant example right now of women in social policy, and that's stuff that's happening right now at a federal government level, provincial government level. It's happening internationally. The time is right. And people may look back and say, when the window of opportunity here was open, we did it. Or we might look back 5-10 years from now and go, we should have fought harder, man, we missed it. And we settled for it only being a 6-month raise, and now all these women are working again, minimum wage, contract, part-time, right? So women in social policy, another thing I wanted to say is sometimes, at first glance, you say, well, how is this a woman's issue? Right? Yeah, how is it a woman's issue? But we've seen with, women aren't being discriminated here. We just pay personal care aides minimum wage. But then when you step back and you look at, oh, well, wait a minute, what if 95% of personal care aides are women? What if, because women disproportionately live longer and end up in nursing homes, it's a woman's issue on the level of the clients. It's a woman's issue on the level of most of us are still doing care work for grandma, grandpa, our child that was born with severe intellectual disabilities. When the personal care aides aren't paid well and doing well and feeling well, the mothers, the sisters, the daughters, the wives, the granddaughters of the sick people were the ones who do the extra work, right? So sometimes an issue at first doesn't seem to gender discriminate, but then it actually does. So we have to be not paranoid, but paranoid, and look it through and kind of track it and say, how does this look like it's actually affecting people? Another really common one historically and historically, a lot of workplaces had certain requirements. Oh, you had to be 6 foot tall. I'll make this up, this part. I don't know the specifics, but you had to be 6 foot tall to be a cop. You had to be 6 foot tall to be a firefighter. You had to be 6 foot tall to go in the mines. Certain jobs for a period of time they didn't say, we're going to discriminate against women because we want to oppress them. But if you say everybody has to be 6 foot tall, that has implications for women because disproportionately we are less than 6 foot tall, right? And then ask, is it really an actual necessity of that job to be 6 foot tall? Maybe not. Maybe that has nothing to do with anything. It's just something that somebody said 6 is a good number. We'll go with that, right?
Yeah.
there are various things like that. I can't at this instance think of another example, but there. Well, here's one where you have, let's say, a whole work area, a whole employment sphere, where it's all 9 to 5. Everybody who works here has to work 9 to 5. Well, if women disproportionately are responsible for childcare and child work, you might exclude a whole bunch of women from ever applying for that job because they have to pick up their kids at 4. Maybe if you changed the whole work world and said, oh, in all these jobs, you can work from 9:30 till 3, all of a sudden a whole bunch of women go, perfect, that's when my kids are in school. Right? So I give those as very practical example, very common, kind of obvious, but sometimes that's how the world, mistakes have been made in the past that weren't necessarily maliciously and consciously put in place, but they had the long-term consequence of certain things. Right? So, there's kind of a little bit of a quick overview. Women in social policy, very profound, and this very much links with a video we made earlier on intersectionality. So I wish you to go back and also watch that video on intersectionality, because women in social policy is going to differently impact on women in northern context, women who are in the rainbow community, women who are of color, immigrant, women of a certain age. Again, we can't. Women isn't just one flat kind of space. Women under a certain age, teenagers, right? There's all kinds of things that we would wish.
Neurodivergent women.
Women with mental health issues. We want all these different things. So when you look at a social policy, that's why it's so important to have all the stakeholders in the room when you think of implementing something or challenging something or strategizing about something. So welcome to the course. I'm excited. There's probably going to be 10 or 20 more videos for you to watch. We're going to make another one in a minute here about some lovely, profound, important books that you might wish to look at as part of your Women in Social Policy Wisdom Accumulation Journey. Thank you, Tuba. Thank you, Carlene.
Thank you.